They ignored her warning about the winter. So she went below the ground and stopped waiting for it to end. Red Hollow didn't question winter. It endured it. People there didn't prepare differently each year. They repeated what had worked before. Or they didn't last long enough to repeat anything. By early October of 1896, something had already shifted. Not visibly, not enough for most people to notice. But Martha Hale did. She had lived in Red Hollow longer than most of them, not as a leader, not as someone important, as someone useful. If a stove failed, she fixed it. If a roof leaked, she sealed it. If food ran short, she made it stretch. She didn't announce it, didn't explain it. She just worked. And because she always worked, people stopped asking why. That was the problem. The river skimmed with ice too early. Not solid, not safe, but present. Then it melted, then froze again, harder. The wind didn't follow its usual path. It shifted without pattern, changed direction midday, then settled into something heavier. Morning frost stayed longer than it should, then disappeared too fast, then returned again. It didn't behave. Most people ignored that, because winter always feels strange before it arrives. But this wasn't variation. It was instability. Martha stood outside her cabin one evening, watching the sky flatten. No color, no movement. The kind of stillness that doesn't mean calm. It means waiting. "This one won't pass clean," she said quietly. The next morning she mentioned it, not to everyone, just a few. At the store, while supplies were being unloaded. "Winter's coming early," she said, "and it's not leaving quickly." A man loading sacks paused, then kept working. "It always comes," he said. "Not like this." Another voice from the doorway. "You reading the sky now?" "I've been watching it longer than you've been cutting wood." That got a few smiles. Not agreement, amusement. "Just stock more wood," she added. "Seal your floors. Check your walls." The first man shook his head. "We're fine." That was the end of it, because people don't reject warnings loudly. They dismiss them quietly. Martha didn't repeat herself. She didn't go door to door, didn't try to convince anyone. Because repetition without change becomes noise, and noise gets ignored. So she stopped speaking and started preparing. She walked the north edge of the settlement that afternoon, past the last cabins, past the last marked land, to where the ground had been cut years earlier. An old root cellar, half collapsed, partially buried, forgotten. Most people saw it as a failed storage pit, too damp, too unstable, not worth repairing. Martha stood at the edge and looked down. The walls were still there, packed earth, reinforced in places with stone. Not intact, but not gone. She stepped inside. The air changed immediately, not warmer, steadier. That was the difference. Above ground, everything moved. Wind, temperature, air. Below, it slowed. She stood there longer than necessary, listening, feeling. Because understanding doesn't come from looking. It comes from noticing what doesn't change. Above loses heat, she said quietly. Below holds it. That wasn't an idea. It was a decision. She returned home, gathered tools without hesitation, shovel, pick, lantern, rope. Not everything she owned, only what mattered, because preparation isn't about bringing more, it's about bringing what works. By afternoon, she was back at the cellar. The entrance had to be cleared first, not completely buried, but enough. She worked it open by hand, stone, soil, roots. Slow progress, but steady. Once the opening returned, she widened it. Not randomly, measured, because underground, mistakes don't fail slowly. They collapse. The first day gave her almost nothing. A larger entrance, a clearer path, but not a shelter. That was enough, because once something begins, it becomes harder to abandon. She returned the next day, then the next, digging, shaping, reinforcing where needed, not faster, more precise, because precision holds where effort fails. By the end of the week, the cellar had changed. Still incomplete, still rough, but intentional. The chamber deeper, the walls stronger, the space defined. From the road, nothing had changed. The town moved the same way, prepared the same way, stacked more wood, sealed more gaps, burned more heat. Martha didn't. She moved below, because winter wasn't something you waded through. It was something you decided where to face. And she had already chosen. Not above, below, where the cold couldn't take everything at once. The cellar wasn't safe yet. It was only different. And different is not enough to survive. It has to be controlled. Martha didn't start by digging deeper. She started by watching. The air inside the cellar didn't move the way it did above ground. It didn't rush, didn't pull. It settled. That mattered, because air only carries heat when it moves. And here, movement slowed, but not enough. She lit a small fire near the entrance that evening, not to warm the space, to test it. The flame rose, then bent, not upward, sideways, drawn toward the opening. That told her something. The cellar still leaked, not through gaps you could see, through pressure. Air entering from one side, leaving through another, carrying heat with it. That had to change. She reshaped the entrance first, not wider, lower, forcing the air to drop before entering, because cold air sinks, and if you control how it enters, you control how it moves. She carved a shallow step down just inside the opening, a small dip, barely noticeable, but enough. Now the cold settled there first, instead of flowing through the entire space. That was the first control point. The second was the chamber itself. She reduced it, not expanding, condensing, because space is loss. More air, more to heat, more to lose. She carved sleeping alcoves lower into the walls, closer to the ground, where temperature stayed most stable. Not comfortable, but protected. The main chamber remained slightly higher, so heat could collect, then settle back down slowly. That created a cycle. Slow rise, slow return. Not escape. That was the difference. She moved the fire next, not in the center, set back, offset, because central heat spreads, but spread heat escapes. Offset heat travels, and traveling heat can be used. She lined the fire pit with stone, not for strength, for storage. Stone absorbs slowly, releases slowly. That delay mattered, because delay creates time, and time allows survival. The first full test came on the third night. The fire burned low, steady. She fed it once, then stopped, waited. The warmth faded, but not immediately. The walls held some of it. The ground held more. The air stayed still. That was enough, because she didn't need warmth. She needed to stop losing it too fast. She lay in one of the lower alcoves that night, closer to the earth. The wind still moved above her, still pressed against the surface, but it couldn't reach everything anymore. That was the shift. Not protection, reduction. By the end of the second week, the cellar had become something else. Not a hole, a system. Airflow limited, heat stored, loss reduced. Not perfect, but predictable. And predictability is what you build survival on. Above ground, people were still preparing the same way. More wood, more fire, more effort. Martha didn't add more. She removed variables. Because systems fail from complexity and survive through control. She stood at the entrance one evening, looked back toward the town, smoke rising from chimneys, movement, noise. Everything still normal, for now. Then she stepped back down into the cellar, where nothing changed quickly. And that was where she chose to stay, before anyone else understood why. Once the space held, she stopped shaping the ground and started shaping the system. Because a shelter that works for one night fails in a week. The cold wasn't the problem. Duration was. The first change she made was storage. Not food first. Heat. The fire pit was too simple, too direct. It gave heat, then lost it. So she extended it. A shallow trench cut from the fire, running along the floor, curving slightly before it ended. Not deep, not wide, enough to guide movement. Because heat that moves too fast is gone too fast. She lined the trench with stone, packed tight. Not smooth, but continuous. Now when the fire burned, the heat didn't rise immediately. It spread along the ground, into the walls, before it left. That changed everything. She tested it the same way. Small fire, short burn, then waited. The temperature dropped, but slower. The floor near the trench held warmth longer. Not hot, but no longer pulling from her. That was the threshold. Not adding heat, stopping the loss. She adjusted the airflow next. The entrance dip worked, but not enough. Cold still crept forward. So she added a second barrier. Not a door, a turn. She extended the entry path slightly, then angled it, so air could not move directly inside. It had to change direction, slow down. And when air slows, it loses force. That was the second control. Inside the chamber, the air became quieter. Not silent, predictable. That mattered, because predictable systems can be trusted. Unpredictable ones fail without warning. She added one more change, small but critical. A secondary opening at the rear, not fully open, not visible from above, just enough to release pressure. Because sealed spaces trap more than heat. They trap failure. And underground, failure doesn't give you time to fix it. Now the system could breathe. Not freely, but correctly. The next test came without warning. The temperature dropped overnight, hard. Above ground, that meant immediate reaction. More fire, more wood. Inside the cellar, nothing changed quickly. The air cooled, but slowly. The walls released what they had stored. The trench carried what remained. The system held. Not comfortably, but consistently. That was enough. Because consistency outlasts intensity. She reduced her fire again, not because she had more time, because she didn't need as much. That was the shift. Less input, more retention. Above ground, the town was beginning to feel something different. Not fear, friction. Things taking longer. Fires burning faster than expected. Effort increasing without improving results. Didn't understand it yet, but the pattern had started. And once a system begins to fail, it doesn't stop. Martha stood in the chamber that night, hand resting against the wall. The earth held steady, unchanged by the drop above. That was what she had chosen. Not warmth, stability. Because warmth fades, but stability can carry you through what comes next. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It settled. Wind first, then cold, then both constant. By the second day, Red Hollow stopped waiting for it to pass. That was when behavior changed. Fires burned earlier, hotter, longer. Wood piles dropped faster than expected. That was the first sign. Not failure, pressure. People fed their stoves more often, woke through the night, added more wood each time. Because that had always worked. Until it didn't. The hotter the fires burned, the faster the heat left. Because rising heat creates space, and space pulls cold in. They didn't see that. They only saw the fire. Inside the cellar, none of that changed. The fire stayed small, controlled. The walls held what they absorbed, released it slowly. The temperature shifted, but never collapsed. That was the difference. By the third night, fatigue spread through the town. Not from work, from interruption. No one slept long enough. No one recovered fully. And when recovery drops, everything else follows. Curtis Rell noticed it first. He added more wood at once, built the fire higher than before. For a moment, it worked. The room warmed. His hands stopped shaking. Then the draft increased. The chimney pulled harder. Heat left faster. And the cold returned worse than before. That was the second sign. Intensity does not solve loss. It accelerates it. By the fourth day, something changed in the town. Not physically, mentally. People stopped assuming they would last. They started calculating. How much wood remained, how long it would last. What happened when it didn't? That was when the thought appeared. Not spoken at first. The ground. Hank Rell said it quietly inside one of the houses. There's a place. No one asked where. They already knew. Martha's cellar. Silence followed, because going meant admitting something. That they had been wrong. That she had been right. That the ground they ignored was safer than the walls they trusted. By nightfall, the first group moved. Not many, 5, then more. They tied rope between them, because distance no longer mattered. Direction did. The storm erased everything. Paths, landmarks, sound. Only pressure remained. Each step was forced. Each breath slowed. Snow resisted movement. Wind pushed sideways. Time stretched, because in storms like that, time doesn't pass normally. It thickens. The rise appeared as a shadow in white, barely visible. They found the entrance half buried. Hank dropped first, cleared snow with bare hands. Others joined, because stopping meant freezing. The door emerged, solid, still. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Then it opened. Warmth didn't rush out. It stayed inside. But it reached them. Enough to change everything. Martha stood there, not surprised, not hurried, just present. "You're late," she said. No one argued. They stepped inside, and the world changed. Not heat, stability. No wind, no movement, no constant loss. Just stillness. Some sat immediately, others stood, because relief disorients. They had expected warmth. What they found was something else. Air that didn't take from them. Walls that didn't drain them. Heat that stayed. Martha moved without speaking much, directed them where to sit, gave water first, then heat. Slow, controlled, because fast warmth harms. Slow warmth restores. More arrived through the night, in groups, some walking, some carried. The chamber filled. Not crowded, used. Every space mattered. Every movement counted. Above ground, the town continued to fail. Not all at once, one structure at a time. Fire lost, heat gone, recovery impossible. Because once loss exceeds input, there is no return. Below ground, everything held. Not perfectly, but consistently. And consistency outlasts everything else. By the second night, no one spoke about leaving, because they understood something clearly now. Above ground was no longer survival. It was waiting. Below, they had stepped out of it. And for the first time since the storm began, the cold stopped deciding who would last. When the storm finally began to fade, no one noticed at first, because survival had already replaced time. The wind weakened slowly, the pressure eased. But below ground, nothing changed. That was the point. The system didn't depend on the storm ending. It held, whether it did or not. That was the difference no one had understood before. They had all been waiting for relief. Martha hadn't. She had removed the need for it. On the 6th day, someone climbed the entrance, carefully, slowly, not to leave, to check. The light above was different, less force, less movement. The storm hadn't stopped, but it had loosened. That was enough. They returned below and said nothing, because words weren't needed anymore. Everyone felt it. The shift had already happened. Not outside, inside them. They had seen something work when everything else failed. That doesn't get forgotten. When they finally stepped out days later, the town was still there, but not the same. Some structures held, many didn't. Doors broken, walls split, chimneys collapsed. Not from one moment, from continuous loss. That was what winter did. It didn't destroy all at once. It took, slowly, until nothing was left to take. Martha stood at the edge of the rise, looking over what remained, not surprised, because she had already seen the pattern. Above ground, everything reacts. Below, it resists. That was the difference. People began to move again, not rebuilding immediately, observing, measuring. Some walked to the cellar, not to enter, to understand. They looked at the entrance differently now, not as a whole, as a choice. A few asked questions. Most didn't, because explanation wasn't necessary anymore. They had lived the result, and result is what changes behavior. By spring, the ground softened, the snow pulled back, and with it, assumptions. Some rebuilt the same way. They always do. But others didn't. Some dug lower. Some reduced space. Some stopped trying to create more heat and started trying to keep it. No one credited Martha directly, not out loud. Because change like that doesn't come from praise. It comes from consequence. Years later, when people spoke about that winter, they didn't talk about how cold it was. They talked about where they went when everything else failed. And one idea remained. Simple, proven, unavoidable. She didn't survive the winter. She stepped out of it. Because survival isn't about enduring what comes. It's about deciding where it can't reach you. And once you understand that, you stop fighting the cold and start removing its power completely.